So Bruce Ward, I've been at the organization for about 21 years, and we're you know, long experience, I guess, in the security area and helping schools try to overcome some of the security challenges with the staffing.
So my name is Tim Homan. I have spent 20 plus years working in K-12 education. And I've recently moved over to Peters and Associates, and I guess my eyes have been opened into the world of security. Security was always important when I worked in schools, but it was never at the top of the list. There was always something else that needed attention. But now that I am seeing it every day, my eyes have been opened, and I guess that's kind of why we put this webinar series together, to get the word out to schools. It's been increasing over the last couple of years, the incidents at schools specifically. And I always thought schools were, low-hanging fruit. Why would someone want to go after a school? What are you going to get? A test, right? We've got rid of social security numbers, so there's just not a lot of information there. But schools have become a big target, and we're going to go over, specifically ransomware this time, and then we'll get into some of the other things in the future ones. So our agenda today, we're going to go through the presentation and then give you a chance to ask some questions at the end. So let's get right into it and start with, what is ransomware? So it's just like what it sounds. You are being held ransom. Someone has gotten into your environment. They've encrypted all of your data. They've locked up your computers. They've taken away access to the internet, and they're not giving it back unless you pay. And that's what I've realized that schools have in common with everybody else. They have money, and they're a prime target.
And I think I just add on that, Tim, just that sometimes it's one system, right? Oftentimes this can be isolated to either a server or a workstation. But in most cases, what we're seeing is that it's proliferating, meaning it may have started at one workstation, but through the networking technology and capabilities, it's designed to propagate, and therefore either a percentage, 20%, 40% of the environment is impacted. Maybe it's all Windows servers, maybe things of that nature. So it's oftentimes a pretty large chunk of your environment that's been impacted.
So now let's go over some statistics specific to education. So the first number I have for you is 1,051. In the first 9 months of 2019, there have been at least 62 incidents involving school districts, which potentially have impacted up to 1,051 individual schools. This is just what has been reported. And I know for sure, there are probably as many unreported incidents as there are reported. The next number I have for you is 2/3. Nearly 2/3 of schools in the United States have fewer than 2,500 students. And so there's just no way they have the staff to deal with cybersecurity. The district I worked at had almost 5,000 students. We had 11 full-time IT staff, and we did not have someone dedicated solely to cybersecurity. And the final number I'll throw out there is 50,000. This number could represent your ransomware payment. It could be your deductible if you have cybersecurity insurance, or it could be money that you invest now to help prevent one of these things from happening to you. Rockford Public Schools was hit by ransomware. They were without internet access, student records for days, and they are planning on spending almost $400,000 on upgrades to their security. So it's renewals of antivirus and anti-spyware, it's backups, the whole shebang.
The only thing I'd add there is we also had a school district that that we have some, we've had some work with in the past that contacted us a few weeks ago that had a ransomware outbreak that impacted a number of their systems. Again, these can be isolated, but this hit, a good 20–30% of their systems coming through a workstation. $25,000 ransom, no inventory of their systems. Their Active Directory was destroyed, and people were able to, or the hackers, if you will, were able to get in via RDP port upon which they had some access and take advantage of a compromised account. So long story short is, we were able to help them get some systems restored. Backups were in various states, but all of these things kind of come to fruition, and this happened on a Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock. And so need to still open up school on Monday. So where can you get to, and what does your remediation look like?
So how do you get this ransomware? One of the most common ways is through an attachment in an email, right? How many ladies that work in the front office aren't going to open the attachment that says invoice? It's right, just that's part of my job. I deal with bills, and when an email comes in and it says invoice on it, I open it up. That's what I do. The next one of the common ways is compromised credentials. That's the school district Bruce was talking about. They had a teacher that they had given elevated privileges to because he did a lot of software installing. Well, they didn't enforce password changes. It was a weak password. His account was compromised. Remote access was enabled, so they were able to just get right into the environment. They spent about a month looking around before they actually took any action. The next one, we actually thought about leaving off until we read the study by Google and a couple of universities that showed 49% of the people that find a USB drive will plug it in. And it's loaded with ransomware. So, it's just human nature. Found a flash drive, I wonder what's on it. A new term that I wasn't aware of, malvertising. So malware in an ad. Who couldn't use a $1,000 gift card from Amazon? Well, if you start that survey, you're infecting your computer. And this all goes back to keeping your machines patched and having good antivirus. So the vast majority of security attacks and compromises across the internet today are only successful because of the number of unpatched systems. So why have schools become a target? I found this great quote, and I thought it really kind of summed it up. Out-of-date hardware and software, few security measures in place, they don't have the people, and it's that sense of urgency because schools build a certain number of emergency days into their calendar, but once those are used up, what are you going to do, right? Parents can only have the kids home for so long. So
going back 3 years or so, going back 3 years or so, we, ransomware, when you would hear it in the cybersecurity news, and we have a monthly half an hour chat that we provide. It's called This Month in Cybersecurity. So we've been covering stories in the news on a monthly basis for almost 4 years now. We run this webinar, and each month, maybe especially 3–4 years ago, the ransomware discussions were really personal. It was really about home computers. It was your, it was just kind of random attacks to kind of any computer that was, again, to Tim's point, underpatched, under antivirused, and people at home were, providing the $50 to a couple $100 to, in Bitcoin to these people that were providing this ransomware to their machine. that has kind of morphed, right? You'll find that the consumer attacks are well down, right? And these are statistics that we get from the FBI and others in the industry that track this. And really what we've seen, especially as we've approached into 2019, while ransomware attacks are way down, they're way more personalized towards organizations. And specifically, the ransomware is now a weapon, right? They call it weaponized. And names like you're starting to get household names like Sam, WannaCry. There actually was one called G&C, G and Crab, which was a team out of Russia that provided some ransomware. And they had so much fun with it in terms of development of this ransomware. They developed 5 iterations of their code. That was their job. This has been known as some of the most successful ransomware ever. And basically, they had other people would take their code and leverage it to exploit money out of organizations, schools, and so forth. And the producers of the software ended up getting about $200 million, but overall they extracted $2 billion through their ransomware. Basically was just like a syndicate of crime where a few people were producing software, a lot of people were leveraging that software to extract money and payments out of people. What's become the new name, if you will, is something called Ryuk, or R-Y-U-K. That is as we've shifted here into 2019, Ryuk has been used to cripple municipalities. So many of you may have heard of the city of Baltimore or about 400 other cities that have been hit with ransomware this year. And a lot of that has taken place at the municipality level. And now, especially in the last few months, so in August, we saw a number of schools that were unable to be opened because 2 weeks prior to opening, they were getting hit with ransomware. Keep in mind, ransomware's they want to hit you at the time when you're least likely to be able to respond or you're under some situation. So availability of systems, which is what ransomware takes away, is exerting pressure on you, right? Because you're needing to open schools. So there were several school districts that were unable to open on time and had to delay opening of school for several weeks. And so this is just coming to manifest itself now in schools. And in fact, the FBI just produced their second ever public service announcement around ransomware. The first one was 3 years ago or so when it was just coming out. And now the FBI is saying, if you're a school, a hospital, we're seeing a measured increase in targeting, and it's time for you to take the right remediation. And then they also produced stances, if you will, on whether to pay the ransom or not. So we've seen this stuff. We've seen school districts, with them trying to solicit payments of, anywhere from $25,000 to $80,000 so far in school districts that we have relationships with, and we're pressing the organizations and schools to try to get ready to combat this.
So, why is this important? What are the ramifications? First is liability. If your network is breached, superintendent, principal, they could be sued for not taking reasonable steps to ensure protection. There are all the legal requirements, right? COPA, FERPA, HIPAA, IEPs. So you have all that information that you need to be protecting. There is your professional reputation, right? Schools are in the business of educating students. Well, if I'm a prospective family and I'm trying to decide which town to move to, am I going to pick the one that's in the news because they've had a breach of their network, or am I going to choose a neighboring school? And then the obvious teaching and learning, right? I don't have access to my tests, my quizzes. I can't take attendance, right? The internet is down. HR can't cut checks for payroll. And now there's a whole new pool of information, right? Student records. So these kids haven't even been out with their identities yet, and they're exposed if this happens to you. So Bruce has a great Social Security reference for anybody that has a Social Security number.
Yeah. Yeah, there was actually school districts recently, right, that were where some of that information was leaked out, and that unfortunately was not a ransomware incident, but where student information is becoming the new gold standard, right? People are particularly sensitive about their own social security numbers, but when it comes to those of your children, it's people are highly sensitive to that. And so while ransomware doesn't immediately mean that there's been a breach of the data, it does mean unavailability to the data, and it does raise concerns. After all, as parents are, having kids attend a district, if you will, they're focused on the kids and on the records thereof.
So what can we do? I'll let Bruce take this one.
Good news is, and I think we'll digest all of this in something that we'll provide to you after the webinar in a ransomware guide. But in general, if you're following NIST cybersecurity framework, there are actually 5 buckets, but for simplification, protect, detect, and respond. And here we have prevent, detect, and respond, which is similar. And in the protect space, which is what we always think of, right? We're always thinking, okay, how can I prevent this from occurring or protect myself from this occurring? There are some very simple basics to do. Patch, okay? Oversimplifying it, but 91% of ransomware attacks are preventable if you patch. And patching means not only the operating system, but also the applications on top of that. It means servers and desktops. And then furthermore, and kind of to a lesser degree, but if you're there, great. Furthermore, though, it's equally important to look at SAN firmware, your APs, your wireless APs, your switches, your firewalls. That infrastructure is also very important. There's been recent areas where SAN firmware has been used. As people know, there's a lot of data on there and potentially backups. People will go after using, again, maligned credentials. They'll go after that SAN firmware and try to lock up the SAN, knowing that that would put the school district in a situation. Patching is kind of number 1. Another relatively easy one to knock out of the park, but we're finding organizations are having challenges with this, is antivirus. Okay, we need full coverage of antivirus on all systems, updated engine and patterns. You need an inventory to know that you've got all systems, right? If you have 100 systems and in your AV console you're seeing 96, well, from the AV console's perspective, you're at 100%. You still have 4 systems out there, however, that might not have any antivirus update on them. So those 2 are kind of basics. In the people area, you've got things like security awareness training. On the technology side, one of the most, the highest degree of certainty that you're not going to be impacted by an event, and this mostly occurs in your terms of your response, is having good backups. And what does good backups entail? Well, good backups entail having a recent backup that you can rely on and that is restorable. And usually what that means, and this comes from our experience, is the term could be used as air-gapped, it could be termed as offline, but you need backups that someone with admin credentials couldn't have deleted or infected with ransomware, because effectively, as Tim mentioned with our client that had where they had been dancing around the network for approximately a month, these are planned events. They would like to cause pain. Okay, the people have elevated credentials on your network. Are they able to get to backup files? Is your backup simply sitting from one SAN to another or off onto something that's accessible? Because those will be the first items that they put ransomware on. Secondly, then they'll do your production systems. They'll either put ransomware on it or delete it. Those are our findings, and they'll do so again on a Friday afternoons at 3 o'clock or right before school opens. So backup's a good technology. We've also had great success in using some DNS protection, where essentially all devices, everywhere they go, whether they're on network or off network, whether a PC, Mac, iOS device, that they're running through a filter prior to them going to the web, so that even in the event that all of your technical controls for protecting things on the way in might not have worked or failed, even if the people through the training failed and still decided to click, with Tim's example of someone in accounting who has to open up that invoice PDF, even if all of that fails, when they get directed out to the web, the DNS protection is there to help curtail that event from occurring. So protection there's certainly a lot of things that could be done in that space. In the detection space, essentially your goal there is just to surface oddities. We've had a number of customers recently, whether they be schools or in some cases organizations, they didn't even tell IT that something weird had happened for 1 or 2 days after the event had occurred. Do you have a culture and do you have a means for people to provide notification? Or, what's the culture like and how are you going to get alerted about this, whether it be some technical systems that tell you something's going on that's fishy, or whether it be people. And in the response area, quite simply, this is 2 things. Having what is formally called an incident response plan, but basically thinking to paper, what are your procedures should an event occur? And, this might include detection type things. How do you identify the problem, assess the problem, and then containment. Are you unplugging network cables and trying to isolate this? And what's the quickest way to do so? Having all of this thought to paper is what's known as an incident response plan. Kind of the last phase of that is investigating and eradicating and kind of recovering from this. Who's responsible for some of these tasks? Who's responsible for communication? What notifications need to go out and how will you notify? And potentially disaster recovery, right? If systems are going to be unavailable for some period of time, what does that look like? And how long can you run classrooms, if you will, probably the most important business outside of, in addition to the administration for the school, how long can you run that? And what would be some procedures that might be run? So cybersecurity insurance obviously is a big part of the response period too. So we had an organization that didn't take enough preventative measures, had some detected an error on one system and quickly propagated. Again, this was on a Friday afternoon. They engaged us to help them respond and walk through some steps. And long story short is, due to the fact that backups were impacted, they didn't have some of those air-gapped backups that we mentioned. Their mission critical systems were back up after rebuilding based on the backups that were available and finding system software. We got their mission critical systems up in 1 to 2 weeks. And we got all of their systems up in 8 to 12 weeks. And this cost them in consulting dollars over $140,000. And this was just to restore the systems back to the state they were in, which were relatively older OSs, older applications and so forth. So now they're back to square, and now they can go spend monies to go, put in the infrastructure to prevent this from happening in the future. So they can be costly ventures, and just want to kind of point out some of those stories.
So the final question, should you pay the ransom? So as Bruce had mentioned, the FBI has released its second public service announcement specifically around ransomware, and they do not advocate paying the ransom. However, they do understand that, right, when you're faced with the inability to function, you need to evaluate whether or not paying the ransom is the right choice. So even if you pay the ransom, there's no guarantee you're going to get your files back.
And in fact, one other statistic we're finding, and this is specific, I believe, to the Ryuk which has been very popular ransomware for encrypting at municipalities and schools and hospitals, and partially part of the reason maybe around the public service announcement, although they don't provide these details. Ryuk, even if you are provided the key to Ryuk, again, FBI would tell you that not all the time when you pay the ransom do you get the key, but even if you get the key and you unlock your files, you are able to unlock about 88% of your files. The other 12% of your files are in a state where they're not recoverable. So you're not back to square by paying the ransom. You're actually still reliant on your backups and your ability to restore, but you do have a majority of your files back. But you can imagine student records, if 12% of your student records are still having problems, or system files for running that system are not available, things may not work. So it's a very big challenge.
So the top 4 takeaways from the FBI public service announcements are backups, making sure you test them, that you can restore from them, that you have an offline copy, awareness and training, making sure that all your users know, don't plug in that USB drive, don't click on that attachment if you don't know where it's from, patching your systems, and making sure your antivirus is up to date. So now what? So at Peters & Associates, we offer a free vulnerability scan, so we can look for things like that remote desktop to see if that's open in your environment. We want you to sign up for our next webinar, The Grim Reality of Phishing. And then, as Bruce had mentioned earlier, we're just putting the final touches on our ransomware guide. So we'll make that available. We're just about out of time, so are there any questions from anyone?
I will also mention too that we have a this month in cybersecurity webinar that we provide on the last Tuesday of every month. So in this particular month, it's October 29th at 11 o'clock, where we kind of just look at all the stories that have occurred in the previous month. This is open to schools and businesses, but we usually get some pretty good attendance, and we'd be happy to have you there to talk about things as they keep unfolding, and ransomware, ironically, is another topic for this month's Cyber 2.